welcome back to my channel. I'm Caspi, and this week we're starting on a brand new dress. I'm so excited. So today we're going to be starting with draping the base of the dress that we're going to be draping the outer layers on top of. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. This is Marilyn, and so this is the dress form that the measurements, bust, waist, and seat align most closely with my clients. And so even though it's not the same, there is a way actually to adjust those measurements to add or take away from the bust, waist, and seat. And I'm actually going to show you guys how to do that as well. Okay, so you heard me say bust measurement, waist measurement, and seat measurement. So just quickly to give you guys a rundown, this is what I mean by that. So if you take your measuring tape, your bust is going to go across the apex at the largest part is also a way that you can think about it, and then you'll measure. So then we go to the waist. You do the same thing. Whenever I say waist measurement, I am referring to the circumference, so all the way around. So I'm going to turn our girl to the side so that you can see. So seat actually refers to the largest part of her booty. So if you hear me say seat, this is what I mean. It's still circumference, but it's just the largest section around your keister. Hardly ever do you have a dress form that is the exact same measurements as your client, so whenever that happens, it's okay. You can still drape on this dress form. Again, I'm going to show you how you can change the measurements to add or take away in all of those seams. To figure out what size panel you need to cut, you're going to take just a few measurements. So you're going to go from the shoulder down to the waist seam because we're going to start with the top first. So I know that this measurement across the bust down to the waist, because this is going to be the longest measurement on this dress form, is about, let's say 18 for good measure. And then across the bust, you're going to go from the center front all the way to the side seam. You're going to go across the bust again because it's going to give you the longest measurement. And that is sitting right at 11 inches. So essentially you're looking at cutting out a rectangle that is 18 inches by 11 inches. So like I said, essentially think in your brain, we're going 18 inches by 11 inches wide. Something to keep in mind is the grain line of your fabric. I always like to do it on grain, so that's how we're going to set out our fabric. So instead of 18 inches long by 11 inches wide, we're going to add about 2 inches to the top and on the sides, again, so that we have excess room to make our fit adjustments and we don't have to just keep replacing our fabric panels. So I'm going to go ahead and start on this raw edge. This is also called the selvage. A rule of thumb is to go 1/2 inch from that edge and go ahead and make a line. So I just drew it 18 inches just now, but we're going to go ahead and extend it 2 inches on the top. So I'm just going to go about halfway down, which looks kind of like about there. And I'm going to go, instead of just 11 inches, we're going to go all the way to 13. So that would be here and here. Alright, so now that we have both our front and our back panel, which they're interchangeable, it doesn't really matter. It matters more the direction in which you're going to actually press this over. You made that line so that you know exactly where to press down, and that is going to give you a really clean center front and center back seam when you go to place it on your dress form. Okay, so now that we've got our muslin patterns, I'm going to start draping it onto our dress form. We're going to start with the bodice front. There's a million ways to do everything when it comes to sewing and pattern making, so this is not the only way, this is not necessarily the most correct way. This is how we're going to do it though, it's going to be great. So what you're going to do is our edge that we have nicely pressed at that 1/2 inch mark, we're going to place that right on the center seam. So we're going to make sure that we have enough excess on the bottom to at least go over, extend past the waistline, and enough at the top to where whenever we pin it to the shoulder seam, there's enough excess to make adjustments. So let's go ahead and get it situated about in that position. I'm lining up my folded edge with the center front seam here. But to actually start with draping it across this, we're making sure that our grain line, yes, is still going up and down, which means it looks good. So we're going to go across the bust and make sure that our grain line on the side is going up and down as well. So now that you've got that over here, we're going to go ahead and start pinning directionally on this section as well. You can feel underneath the side seam, so that's what you're going to want to make sure is nice and taut. So now that I've got the side seam all pinned, we're going to move upwards directionally. So we're just making sure that this whole front section is nice and smooth, nice and flat across the bust, and I'm going to start pinning our shoulder seam, again, directionally. Just keep on doing that. Whatever way you're pushing the fabric, the pin goes down into the opposite direction. That looks nice. Let's take a look at our necklines. You have excess fabric and you just need to cut it. All you have to do is go ahead and just clip into your excess what you definitively know you will not be using. And then you're going to start clipping downward into the fabric until these drag lines, these puckers, they just dissipate. So now I'm going to start getting rid of all of this excess, and so this is how I do that. So you're just kind of like gently pushing it to where it might naturally fall, but you're wanting everything to be kind of centered around your apex here. Alright, so now we're going to move down to the bottom dart as well. So I'm going to go ahead and clip some of this bottom section. I'm maybe going in about 1/4 of an inch, maybe 1/2 of an inch in some sections, and I'm doing this just to, again, relieve that extra pressure whenever we smooth the fabric inwards, because you are draping a 2D piece of fabric onto a 3D form. So we're just going to be smoothing as much as we can. At this point, I'm just kind of going over everything, double checking that everything is pulled nice and tight. So the next thing that we're going to do is, because this under structure, this base of the dress that we're working on is actually going to have cups and boning installed into it directly, and then excess fabric is draped on top, we're going to place the cup forms that I already have onto here and then mark them so that our pattern shapes directly align with where the cup is going to be placed. So let's do that. So at this point, we're going to start marking all of our construction lines, including the ones that are going to go around the bra cup and where we're going to insert our boning ultimately. I really like to purchase these from a company called Walk Sewing. I think that they have a really great selection. I think that they have great products, great prices, and they come in like 5 seconds. We're going to place the right hand side and then mark our construction lines around it. So now we're going to start to draw our construction lines where it's actually going to look like. So I have my pencil. You can do this with a pen if you'd like, but I find the pencil is easier. You can actually kind of erase it on muslin fabric. It's just easier to start this way. So what I'm going to do is start to draw the silhouette that my dress is going to be. And if I need to change my lines, I'll just move them around. So. Now that we have our basic silhouette of what the front panel is going to look like, what I've done is kind of dipped it down to the front here because I do want it to be V-neck. I will also make a little mark right here because there's going to be a mesh panel inserted right there. You're not going to see it once the drape is all on top of it, but it does provide extra structure and make sure that we have this really great, deep, sweetheart neckline. So at this point, we've marked all of our intersections for where our cup actually will get inserted into the garment. And so now we're going to make our construction lines for where the panel pieces will get cut. So I'm going to take off the cup and then show you guys how to remove that. The cup is removed. You can see very clearly where the placement is going to be. So essentially, I'm going to draw a line where I've pinched this through here. And it's going to kind of just very loosely go down here. This is a natural princess seam, so cutting out this excess will give me a pattern shape from fabric that is going to be as close as possible to feed right on the top of the cup and to be nice and clean and polished. Trim off the excess because we don't need it. Goodbye. I'm leaving about 1/2 of an inch, 3/4 of an inch, to an inch, something like that around the outer edges. Because once again, this dress form measurements do not exactly align with my clients, and so we still need to leave room for our adjustments that need to be made. And then that will make it easier when we're transferring this fabric to paper patterns. So the bodice back is considerably easier than the front, so I've gone ahead and taken my panel, again with the pressed edge at that center back seam. It just helps keep everything in place. I'm pinning directionally, just a few more pins, because I am going to be pulling it over to this right hand side, and I don't want any of my fabric to slide out of place while I'm doing that. So essentially this midsection here, if you just want to smooth it right out all the way to the outer side here, I can still feel my side seam, so I'm just going to directionally pin it all the way down in. I'm going to keep smoothing it over, keep smoothing it so that it releases all of this. We also don't need this extra down here, so I am going to go ahead and trim that off because it's a lot. We basically used our front measurements to cut that panel, so that's why you had so much excess, and I'm actually going to do it even more because I know we don't need this much. Nice. Okay, so just like before, you're going to go ahead and cut into these little puckers. And you see it immediately releases all of that. Immediately. We're going to start to mark our construction lines just like we did on the front. So I'm looking right here to see where it immediately lines up, which is about right there. I'm just going to slightly start to go downward in the back. If you have more on the back to pull the front close to your body, you'll find that your strapless gown stays up a little bit better. We measured just like we did the top. I measured from here down to where, again, I thought my client, modesty-wise, would appreciate the length. And then I measured the width from the center front to the side, as well as the side to the center back of the bust, not the bust, the booty, around here, so that we didn't run out of fabric while we're placing our panels. So let's go ahead and do it. Just like the top, you're going to overlap the waistline just a little bit. So the biggest thing is at the largest part of the seat, that's kind of where you're going to bring your hand to smooth it over, because that makes sure that your grain lines are up and down. I'm going to go ahead and put pins in the side seam. So at this point, similar to what we did on the bust here, you're just kind of trying to take your fabric, and I'm kind of pinching it over the princess seam as much as I can, finding a good starting point. So I'm going to kind of go down about here. So I'm leaving about a 1/4 of an inch-ish, which whenever we transfer this to paper patterns, you would do this anyways, because you're essentially just removing this excess fabric from that seam, so it's not going to be there anyways. And see, just like that, they look more like pattern shapes that you might recognize. Okay. So I'm going to keep doing it. I'm just kind of pulling it in comfortably to match up with the princess seam that I've already created on the top. So after I've got that pinned in place, I notice that I have some excess over here. So all I'm going to do is remove some of these pins and just smooth it across. So at this point, again, I'm going to start doing my construction lines. So you can kind of see through this muslin, which is also why you use this fabric, because it's a little bit transparent. It's practice fabric. It doesn't cost a lot, blah, 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 all of that. So at the bodice, we're actually going to be removing this section. This instead is going to be a dart because it's a little bit less work and it doesn't affect the overall fit to leave it as a dart. So I'm not going to take too much time marking all the way down. I'm really just going to draw a nice little X right here, and I'm going to notch it right here so that there's a clear distinction that these two come together and they meet here, so that whenever I'm sewing it, I have a very clear distinction of where to begin. So I'm going to take my other panel that I've already cut, and I'm just going to do the exact same thing. And a different aspect to this as well is we're going to mark on the back our zipper placement. Boom. And then again, we're matching up with our princess seam right here, so that's where you're going to want your dart to live. Okay, so at this point we're going to go ahead and mark our construction lines, and then we're just about done. After this point, I'm going to show you how I will be adjusting the measurements to match up more closely with my client so it fits her, and not just the dress form. And then on the back part here, I'm going to make sure I put a little notch little X for my dart. And then industry standard is between 10 to 14 inches for the length down for your zipper placement. I will be using an invisible zipper. And so, I'm gonna actually mark it down from the back neckline as far down as I want through the seat so that whenever she goes to step into it, she doesn't have any problem hopping in when it comes to her hips, right? So this down to the waist is about 4.5, that's fine. But you wanna make sure that you go down like at least 10 to 12. I mean, you see like the seat sits at about 10 inches, so you want it to be maybe a little bit lower than that so that she has no problem getting into her garment. So I'm gonna go to where the 12 is and just kind of mark it right there. And then I'm going to take a look once more at the front and make sure the length, so that's the side. So we're gonna bring it down just a little bit further. Okay, so since we're using muslin fabric, this is also really nice because you can just write notes on it if you need to. So we're gonna start making adjustments to the bust, the waist, and the seat. So let's first begin by taking the actual measurements of the dress form to make sure that you have a clear understanding of the size, right? And we're gonna write them right down onto the dress form. So the bust measures to, let's say, snugly 39.5. So I'm gonna write 39.5, and I'm gonna just kind of label this M because her name is Marilyn. So I'm gonna remember that these are her measurements. And then we're gonna do her waist. That's about 31, nice and snug. Now we're gonna do the seat. Once again, it's the largest part of the booty. Okay, so we're writing down that the seat is 41 inches. So now that we've done that, we're gonna compare them to my client's measurements, which I've written down here. So the bust on this dress form is 39.5 inches. My client's bust is 40 inches, which means that her bust is technically half an inch bigger than that. But that half of an inch right now would get distributed to 1/8 on all seams, and it's just not even worth the time it would take to mess around with it because it's not gonna matter. So we are gonna move to the waist. So the waist on this dress form is 31 inches. My client is 35. So that's 4 inches difference, which although that sounds like this much, when you distribute it across the amount of seams that you have, it's not that much. So the difference that we have between these is 4 inches. So I'm just writing it down so that my brain can see this. So let's count the amount of seams that we have, shall we? We've got one seam here, we've got one seam here, and it's easy to add it to the back because it's just a straight seam. So even though we have one seam here and one seam here, we don't have the rest of the panels all put together, so you can't forget about the side over here that you're adding to. So what we're gonna do instead is we're gonna take that 4 inches and we're actually gonna divide it by 8 because that's 8 total seams. When we have our other panel here, it will also go out from this way.